Rebecca Jernigan, your tour guide into discoveries. Coming to you live from the heart of America to around the globe via the World Wide Web, satellite, and podcast. Let's journey together into the realms of the known to the unknown in search of enlightenment, knowledge, and truth. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet Earth. This is your host, Rebecca Jernigan. You are listening to Journeys with Rebecca right here on wolfspiritradio.com and also being heard on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com Studio B. Please remember that both of the stations are totally listener supported. So please, if you can, donations really make a great difference. It allows everybody to stay on the air and allows all the great show hosts to bring forward all their great information. And of course, it's not going to be mainstream. And don't forget to visit the website. That's journeyswithrebecca.com. And please do sign up for the newsletter. You can also follow me on Twitter. And you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's easy enough for me to say. Now, there's a bunch of past archive shows up there and, of course, all the latest shows. So if you miss the live shows, you can always go back and listen to them. I will be I've started already to post some of the older shows up on YouTube, so be sure to subscribe so you'll make sure you get them. I'm doing about 3 to 5 a day. I kind of get bored with the process, so that's about all I can handle. So, okay, so another announcement. On the 31st of July, I will not be taking any new clients. As I said before, I'm turning my focus into classes and workshops as well as getting out my books. So if you do want a session, please do go to the website and follow the instructions there. You know, we've got a few weeks left, so if you get your appointment in, we'll get you scheduled. And I do have an opening in my mentorship program. It certainly will assist with all these energies. And also don't forget to follow me on my Facebook page as well. Now, my book, Night Experiences, Visions, and Prophecies, both of them are out, either in the Kindle version or in the paperback. I urge you to get a copy of it. It's a really great read, and the illustrations will bring the book to life. So thank you for that, and thank you for all those who have supported me so far. This is going to be an explosive interview tonight. Tonight I've got a really fabulous guest. Many of you listening to this broadcast will know how it feels to have your computer invaded. There's malware and Trojans and viruses and the like. And then to add insult to injury, some of you may have also had your data stolen through Yahoo, your credit card companies, and in some cases even your tax return info, because many of their companies had their systems compromised and all your data was mined and stolen. Well, tonight's guest is going to lead us all down a rabbit hole that few of us ever even knew about. His name is Mike Hawks. His book is called Shadow Code. And I'm going to read a little excerpt off the back of it for you so that you can kind of get a background, and we're going to have him on, and he's going to tell us some more about himself. While demonstrating on how to use social media data for intelligence activities, a computer scientist noticed something strange about the data he captured. When this strange data disappeared, he realized that something or someone had compromised his computer. Before long, he realized that this wasn't something as mundane as a computer virus. His journey then takes him into the murky worlds of the intelligence community and big business. As people around him started to die, he becomes ever more intent on finding out who is behind the greatest threat to the personal freedoms in modern civilization. Based on real technologies, this book also shows how the intelligence communities can gather information, use sex and social media as a weapon, and compromise virtually any computer system globally. If you thought you had privacy, think again. You guys are going to have questions. Please put them in all caps. Please try to wait until the second hour so Mike can get his story out. And we've got it. I know it's just, this is going to blow your mind. This is absolutely going to blow your mind. I can't even begin to tell you. So we're going to welcome Mike Hawks to the show. Hi, Mike.
Hi, good evening.
Oh, I've got rented lips and I'm tripping all over my tongue and everything else. So
Yeah, I'll probably have the same problem.
It's all good, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, welcome again to the show. I told you this just before we went on the air, but I wanted everyone else to hear about this as well. I ordered your book online and I got it, the Kindle version, because I knew I would get it in time to be able to read it, to actually sit down and read it before I actually had you on the show. So I read this book and I downloaded it, early in the morning, early my time anyway. And it took me all day to read it because I had a lot of different interruptions and things that I had to get away from. But I'm going to tell you, this book kept me so mesmerized. And I'm not techno. I'm seriously, I'm not. I just am not techno oriented like that. But I have enough information. I have a son that's a computer engineer, and of course he talks to me about his job and all of this other stuff. So I have I knew a little bit about some of the stuff you were talking about, but boy, when you talked about the activities and things that was going on, it was crazy. This book just read like a mystery novel. It's like, oh my God, who done it? Who's in it? Who's doing what? It was crazy. It's a rabbit hole that honest to God, you could have just blown me over with a feather. So I'm gonna leave that there, and then I'm going to ask you, because this is your first time on the show, and maybe give some background information so people know who's talking and how and what it is that you are bringing forward to the table, and then we're going to get into the book.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for a great introduction. I'm a bit of a computer nerd, but I sort of came out of the defense environment into, of all things, broadcast. So I went from totally secret into broadcast. And as part of the broadcast stuff, I was heading up media for some major sporting events, and I was actually responsible for the first ever broadcasts of television via the internet all the way back in 1995. The first T1 line in California, if you want a bit of strange local news, I guess, to America, came to my hotel room in San Diego, not to a big data center or something on those lines. And I actually found myself in a position where one day we had a phone call coming in from one of the warehouses saying, hey, you know what, we've had a T-shirt returned. And I sort of went, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm computers and I'm doing the video and I'm doing all this media stuff. And he said, yeah, but we haven't issued any of these yet. So if we hadn't issued any, how on earth could we have some returned? So at that point, I started getting very involved in protecting consumers online and trying to work out what had actually gone wrong and how it had gone wrong. And I invented a whole series of technologies. One of them is probably the most annoying piece of technology when you're making a payment, which is the thing that asks you for your first, 12th, and 934th digit of your secret passcode. So I invented that one, and I've also worked a heck of a lot to try and protect consumers globally. So there's a thing called the Distance Selling Directive. When I was trying to get people coming in to pay for goods and services, if they were ripped off, actually we couldn't work out which police would actually pick up the tab for policing it. And so we came up with a really simple concept that the point of entry of malware or bad data is the policing jurisdiction that applies, and they end up paying for it. So I was going through all of these various processes. I was also getting very heavily involved in mobile and getting stuff out onto mobile. So again, invented a load of technologies around making sure that you can share information and messages between networks seamlessly, and all the billing works properly. And here in the UK, also working very much behind the scenes, but as part of I chair the Mobile Data Association here in the UK, and I also sit on a couple of the security forums to try and protect people online. So most of my sort of technical career took a very strange segue when we got ripped off all those years ago for the sporting events, and I just became very determined to try and stop people from ripping everybody else off. So that leads me up to where we are now, I suppose. Yeah,
that leads you into your next portion of what you did. That became almost your passion, wasn't it?
But yeah, it became that way. I mean, if you tell me a good few years ago that I'd be championing consumer rights and protection and privacy and trying to do things behind the scenes to stop us becoming the most surveilled country in the world. But I failed on that one because we are. But I think from a privacy point of view and from a protecting people point of view, I went out because I was actually touting to a certain extent security and how we protect ourselves, and speaking out a little bit about against not social media per se, because I think it's a great thing, but about information leakage and how people get compromised. We have a thing in the UK where the UK government has decided that all of the internet service providers here have to retain your browser data for around about 3 years, which means that every single piece of communication is being recorded for a 3-year period. Now, it's not the actual content they're recording, it's what they call the metadata. And this is information about information. So I've been harping on for a while about this metadata actually is as useful, if not more useful, than the data itself. I'm not particularly interested in what brand of coffee you necessarily drink, but I can find out. And I can also find out where you are right now, and I can find out who you communicate with, and I can also find out where you go on a regular basis. And with that information, I can work out all kinds of things about you. So I've been saying this for a while, and I train police forces and intelligence groups in forensics and data acquisition and how to process the data and look at it in a way that it isn't biased and is properly constructed. And I overheard two people talking about some of the stuff I was saying that we could do, and he said, "Oh, he's just scaremongering," and I got really, really annoyed by it. And it was one of those where I came home and I ranted a little bit, it's gone really well, but I heard these people, my other half just said, you know what, you've got to hit them in the face with a brick sometimes. You have to actually show them what you can do. Forget about talking about it. You're too gentle. Go out there and show them. So I went out and I bought myself a little tiny computer board. It's a $25 board. It's a thing called a Raspberry Pi. In fact, I've got it in my hand now. I can tap it in front of the mic here. And it's got two antennas on it, one at the front, one at the back, and basically it becomes a fake Wi-Fi hotspot. And it isn't just a Wi-Fi hotspot, it picks up anything that's coming through it, and it basically takes every single piece of communication in both directions, so anything that's going out and anything that's coming back into your devices. And it presents itself. It's got a beautiful little logo, which is a B logo. And I presented it with a set of terms and conditions that made people giggle. So it's, I reserve the right to intercept all your communications. I reserve the right to impersonate you. I reserve the right to empty any bank accounts unless they're already empty. And I had these kind of things. I think at the back end of it, I even said that, I reserve the right to tell your children, as long as they've got good teeth and good health, and shoot your mother-in-law. Now, I normally get a bit of a giggle at that point for people, but then I actually demonstrate what the box is really doing. And of course, it's intercepting everything. So we can see every single piece of data that is coming across the network. And I use that as one of the demonstrations at the beginning of the book. There's another one that I did, which is slightly more serious, and I did it. In some ways, it's one of those that I regret doing because we really, really did lay into one poor woman who was an unsuspecting victim of my demonstration. And on the other side of it, I was actually quite pleased that I did because it was to the Association of Chief Police Officers here in the UK. It's a big conference, annual conference. And I'd been asked whether I could do something a little bit different. Now, that's a red rag to a bull to me when I'm doing presentations. So I'd gone out, I did a demonstration here where I said, let's just start with people that are tweeting locally. And I simply had a list of tweets that were coming through from people that were posting within something like about and it being a predominantly male audience, they picked a very pretty redhead girl in the Twitter feed. And I clicked on that and it said, I'm sitting in Costa Coffee, bored. And there was a Foursquare link. So I followed the Foursquare link. There was a Facebook link off that, which took me to her personal details. At this point, I had her kids' names. I had where they went to school. I had the fact that she was arguing Barclays Bank at the time. I had links out to other members of her family. Now, some of those had lockdown profiles, but of course that doesn't matter if you're accessing the metadata, the data about the data, because you're then saying, well, let's hop across to other people. And when they're contributing, all of a sudden you start to pick up information from all of these locked profiles as well, because the parts that they're talking about there aren't locked down. So before long, in less than 5 minutes, I'd got a mother's maiden name, I'd got her parents' names, I'd got a kid's names, I'd got the fact that she'd been out on holiday. And I mentioned earlier that I'd been championing privacy and other pieces. When you take a photograph on something like an iPhone or an Android phone, it captures a whole load of data, including your longitude, latitude, and your altitude at the time. If you're traveling, it'll give you the speed and direction of travel. And she'd been on holiday, and there's some pictures that were there on her Facebook feed at the time, or on her Twitter feed, I forget which one. And it showed her in Barcelona, beautiful hotel. But because I had the coordinates for her, I could go straight to Google Maps. There she was. That was the hotel. We knew her altitude, so we knew roughly where she was in the hotel, so which room and on which floor. And there were other photographs across on the other side then that were showing that she'd been partying with a group of lads elsewhere in the hotel in a completely different area. So by the time that you put all of this stuff together, we had a vast amount of information in probably 5 to 10 minutes, that kind of thing. And this was just publicly available data. This was not going through and trying to do anything covert or look at anything. Now, I'd also managed to pull back both her home phone number and her mobile number. So I gave her a ring off the podium, being, as I said, a bit of an arrogant swine at the time. And I just rang her and said, "Hi, is that whatever her name?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Right, hi, I'm Mike. I'm in the conference center next door. We've been going through social media profiles, and I think you might find it interesting to see what we have been able to pull back about you. Now, of course, I can only guess at whether I've got this right or wrong, but I'd be really interested, and the audience here would be really appreciative if you would let us know whether I've got it accurately or whether I'm completely off the mark. You're the only one that can tell us that. Would you come around and tell us?" And she went, "Well," and I said, "Well, you did say you were very bored, and I've got a room full of uniformed police officers. They're predominantly male. They're men in uniform. Come on, you've got to come around from Acosta next door." And she said, "Well," and it wasn't a no, so I said, "Great, okay, I'll send somebody round and pick you up." So sure enough, they went round, picked it up, and she was horrified, just absolutely horrified at the amount of data we had about her. It was correct. And I was sat there on the train coming back from that event, and I had a few hours to kill, and I was just sitting there thinking, you know what? If I wrote a textbook about this stuff, people wouldn't believe me. If I started to write what we do in the intelligence side and what we can do with the networks underneath it all, people wouldn't necessarily believe me. So the way to start putting this together would be through a fictional link. But if we're going to do that, what would we do if every single computer in the world or every single device in the world was actually connected? What would we do with all that computing power? And the answer isn't collecting data. Collecting data is really, really easy. I can shove my hand out of the window. If it comes back in wet, it's probably raining. And I could say to everybody, I could show you my wet hand and you would believe me. Now, that's only part of the picture. If I had pulled my hand in and it was wet, but I actually disclosed the fact that there wasn't a cloud in the sky, but there's a guy 2 floors up washing the windows with a hose pipe, you might have a slightly different interpretation of that data. So if we start to spin all of these various bits together, it becomes very easy very quickly, because people believe data, for us to start being able to manipulate how people understand things, where they go to, and how the intelligence agencies and indeed the governments of this world can control society at large through the manipulation of how people perceive that information is being presented. So a bit of a long ramble, but that's the starting point for the book. So I go through the demonstrations, and at that point we start to look at what we can really do with the data. And once we start getting involved with data at a lower level, actually it's quite an horrific thing.
Well, a couple of points here I'd like to make is that, first of all, is if I was that lady that you come and got, I probably would have fainted right there, seriously, thinking that, that people are only looking at the people that are looking at your information is like people. If let's say you're on Facebook, and people on Facebook and they're your friends, because you don't have it open to the public, so only friends can look at it. So, and then all of a sudden you really, really figure out that that's not what's happening at all. I probably would have just fainted right there. I probably would have just unplugged everything. Now, and you're going to get to it. I know you will, because you said devices. Now, you're not talking just about desktops, laptops, your phones. You're talking about other things, which you'll get into later because that part was in the book as well. But it's very fascinating to think that and it's just so frightening to me. I went to, I order stuff online because I live out in kind of a country place, right? So I don't always get to going in and get into the city. So I order a lot of stuff online. And you know what freaks me out? And it shouldn't, but I go in there and they go, oh, well, you ordered this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And you've also paid for this, this, and this. At times when I've actually been there, it wasn't just an online order. When I've actually went into the physical brick and mortar building, right? And I'm thinking, oh my God, everything I've done, it just shows everything. I mean, it's getting more and more apparent that, you know, that your information, how you shop, what you shop for, like if I go in and look up, let's say I go in and look up a cookbook for making roast beef. You know, I want to make a roast beef dinner and I don't know how to do it. All of a sudden I'll get all this spam stuff in my spam box about recipe books and what to do with this and things from home delivery services for food and stuff. And I'm not signed up for them. It's just all of a sudden it's just in my spam box. So I know that those things that I'm doing, that I'm going out on the net and I'm searching for, it's triggering something because it's not coincidence. There's just stuff that's happening. And it's just repeated and repeated. So it's just crazy stuff. It really is. And like I said, you could have bowled me over with a feather after I got done reading your book. I was like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with all this. Anyway, so that's that part of it. And you know, I'm hoping maybe you can, before the show's over tonight, and we'll get into that in the second hour, maybe you can give some tips and tools and stuff for people to maybe make it a little bit more safer for, you know, just the average Joe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Okay. So we've established that this really started, your thing started when you were giving that public, kind of demonstration. And the next thing that happened there was that you watched something come across your screen.
Well, the thing is with data that, when you're monitoring what's going on, particularly when you've got it pretty tied down to a demonstration, you're expecting particular things to occur. You're expecting, when you look at a device, you're looking at whether or not you're seeing things like an email coming across, or you're seeing a connection into social media. Now, the thing is that every device is going to connect in a particular way, and if you can get in at the beginning of those connections, you've got that connection, and you can do anything you like with it at that point. So this is called a man-in-the-middle attack. So basically, I'm sat there in the middle. Your mobile device, if I just talk about the mobile stuff or computers for a moment, when it first makes that connection, it makes a request coming across and says, are you this network? At that point, my magic box, this little freebie box that I called it, said, yes, I am. And you then go through a whole series of exchanges off your device that you may not even be aware are happening. So it's saying, have I got any emails? Now, if you've got multiple accounts, it's logging you into multiple email accounts. It may then say, have I got anything on Facebook? Or have I got any Twitter messages? Have I got anything even on Skype or whatever? So each of those services, because they've been disconnected, you're effectively logging back on behind the scenes in order to access that information and pull it back down. So your device is quietly handing over your username and password each time that's happening. Now, the device manufacturers and the service providers will say, oh yeah, but we've secured all of that. But if I'm in the middle and I'm getting that beginning of that connection, I can have a very secure connection between me and you, and I can make it as secure as you'd like it. If you want a padlock in your browser, you can have a padlock in your browser. Fine, no problem. And I will then have a very secure connection onto your bank and elsewhere. So the first piece of very valuable information here is that the strongest security you have is the weakest thing across all of your various services. So if you've got a service that you log on to on a regular basis, which isn't particularly well secured, actually, if you use the same password and same email account or username on multiple services, at that point, we've got you. We've got every piece of data that we need from you. We can get access to your email accounts. We can gain access to your social media accounts, and we can do it without you even knowing that we're there. So from a connection point of view, if we can get in at the beginning of that connection, you're there. Now, I expect to see particular pieces and particular parts of communication going across. So when I'm doing a demonstration, I'll filter bits out so that I'm not exposing the poor victims. Sorry, my audience, and I'm not showing up any data which is likely to compromise them. But at the same time, I'm looking for information which is either weird or is what I call out of band data. So it's stuff which is outside of the normal transfers. And I'd noticed that there was some data that had gone out of my devices but hadn't actually ever been acknowledged or anything else. Now that's really weird because you have a whole series of things. They're called handshakes in the computer world where I'm going to send you something and you're going to say, okay, I've got that, or no, I haven't quite got it. Could you say that again? And you've got this whole bit of communication that goes on behind the scenes. So for me, just to see something going out, it's a bit like a broadcast. I have no idea if anyone's listening or not. I hope they are, but I can't tell. In a computer world, there's no reason for you to do that. And you would expect to get some kind of response back. Now, when I looked at that, I was saying, well, hold on a second. If this isn't being acknowledged anywhere, why have I got a device that's broadcasting? And more importantly, why is it my little freebie device? Because I haven't put anything on there that should do that. And when I came to look for it later on my main computer, now that sounds like that could be okay. You know, you've done a broadcast, so it shouldn't necessarily be there. But I've recorded everything. So in that recording, there should be a copy of that data, and it wasn't there. More to the point, the stuff that I'd actually got on things like screen captures and other bits also no longer showed that data. Now, for data to disappear out of text is relatively easy. It's a simple thing. You can have a filter somewhere, it'll do it. To take it out of an image and make the image look right actually is a lot of work. You've got to work out which part of text it is. You've got to work out whether it is text, whether it's relevant. And if you're going to then put something else in its place in order for the rest of that graphic to work, you've got to go through a lot of work to make that happen. So at that point, you start getting really, really suspicious about what is actually happening here. This is manipulation of imagery, and this is manipulation of imagery that is on my smartphone at the time, or my tablet. And once you start getting into that, you're starting to get into some very serious artificial intelligence, or you've got a human behind it. And if there's a human looking at my data and is modifying it on the fly, then somehow I'm leaking, and I don't like leaking, if you pardon the expression.
No, not a good idea in any way.
So at that point, you have to then start analyzing where's that data gone, because I'm either going completely insane, or something very weird's happened. Actually, because I'd just unplugged the device at the end of it, I'd managed to get a copy of it, and it was sheer fluke that I had a copy of it. So I could then demonstrate to people that I wasn't going completely mad. So I had been broadcasting something to someone somewhere. By the look of it, it was an encrypted chunk of data. After you've been working with data for a while, you know what encrypted data looks like. So this was an encrypted chunk of data. I had no idea where it was going, what it was saying, and it really started to bother me. And I'm sort of obsessive about these things. I like to know what's happening and what information I'm leaking. So the book then takes us into this whole piece around somebody's basically taken the same journey as me, and has found out where this data ends up and how it's actually being transmitted. But it takes a while to get there. So there's a bit of detective work in there, and it starts pulling in government agencies, so intelligence agencies, and it also starts then pulling in. There are a few twists in the plot at that point, so I won't give the game away too much.
Well, now let's talk a little bit about the fact that you wrote this as a fictional piece, but this is actually based on your actual life, your real life, and
very much so, very much so.
Yeah, and so we're talking about data being mined and somehow being changed during the course of communications, or even when you're not communicating, not only just by our own like local governments, but by governments worldwide. I mean, but
also by corporates. I mean, if you go to a free Wi-Fi hotspot, so and I'm not endorsing or in any way slugging off these companies. So you go to Starbucks, you go to McDonald's or any of these, and they've got a free Wi-Fi there. If you hop onto that Wi-Fi, you won't be saying to me, please take me to the Starbucks website or to any McDonald's website or whatever. But when you first connect, you are taken to a page, regardless of what you've asked for, saying, please give me your email address as a signature to prove that you agree, or to sign to the terms and conditions, whatever. So you put your email address in, you agree to the terms and conditions without reading them, of course, and then you're on. Now, you have absolutely no idea which device you've just hopped onto. So that could be my freebie, because my freebie says, yeah, I'm McDonald's or I'm Starbucks. And at that point, every single part of your communication is compromised. And I mean every single piece, whether it's got a padlock on it or not. That's completely irrelevant in this context. So for one, I would never use mobile, I'd never use Wi-Fi in a public space. I just don't, I don't trust it as far as I can throw it. And the reason for that is that if I can do this with a £25 box or $25 box, I can afford to put lots of these around the place. And I don't actually need to hack you at all. I can get hacking toolkits that will do it automatically on my behalf. Actually, what I could do here is I could sell these live connections at $25 a piece on the dark networks here, so on the Tor networks. So for every single connection that this thing snoops and manages to get hold of, I could be selling that to a group in Russia or China or across in Uganda. They do the hacking, so it's minimal risk for me. All I've done is provide a bit of a Wi-Fi hotspot. And if I put something like alarm box, do not switch off, and put it into a cupboard somewhere, the odds are that the fire service would look at it and think it's the burglar alarm. The burglar alarm people would think it's the fire service. No one would ever turn the thing off, and you're just capturing every single connection that comes into range. If the box is stronger than your Wi-Fi elsewhere, you'll connect to my box, not to the Wi-Fi. And as long as you get your Wi-Fi or what you believe to be your Wi-Fi at the end of it, you're fine. So in some ways, you're being intercepted all the time when you go onto a public Wi-Fi anyway, because they don't allow you to do things like watch video or stream, or a lot of them don't. So they're actually stopping you from communicating on those levels. They're taking you to a website that you didn't ask to go to. So you type in google.com, it takes you to the McDonald's sign-in page. You never asked to go there. So you are seeing here interception at the point of connection. That is a man-in-the-middle attack, and you are freely giving your information to these people. Now, again, for me, I get slightly upset with social media and the data that they ask for that's very personal, so I never give them a real date of birth. Why do they need to know that? That probably gets me booted off Facebook now. But for me, I have a set of things here that says that's my personal data, and I actually demand the right to be schizophrenic online. The information, the information I give to my doctor is not the information I want to give to my bank, is not the information I want to give out on Facebook. So I want different facades. I want different ways of putting this data out there, and it's actually very, very hard to do. Start doing things like single sign-on. So I sign on to Twitter, it automatically signs me onto Facebook. It automatically logs me into my Google account, or whatever these things are. And again, if I compromise one account, I've got the lot. I've got your entire social networks. I've got all of your connectivity. I was talking to BBC Radio over here, and the presenter at the time said, "You sat at your computer, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What can you find out about me?" Now, there is nothing, let me tell you, there is nothing so boring as listening to somebody tapping away on a computer going, wait, bear with me, on radio. So I said to him, "I'll tell you what, I'll do this immediately the show's finished, but I'll come back to you." And he said, "Right, okay," and we moved on. So within 2 minutes of the broadcast finished, I actually sent him a picture of his house, along with his wife's mobile phone number, his home phone number, his son's name. Now this is how daft this kind of stuff gets when you get into linking data. He had a BBC profile. The BBC profile gave his Facebook page. His Facebook page just had I'd been married to, wife name, since whatever. There was a link. Clicked on that, there's his wife's page. So let's just take this through. I've now gone through BBC page, his page. 2 clicks to get to his wife. On his wife's page, it said website. Clicked on that. 3 clicks. That was her home business. So within 3 clicks, I had now got her business page. She's a crafter. She'd launched a craft business from home. In the opening text about that particular company, it said, "I started this business with my children, both of them named at that point, when I was on maternity leave. through the process of all of this, we've developed this business now. It's a family-run business, and I now take great pleasure with my grandkids, again named. So I had grandkids' names, I had the kids' names. They were linked off the Facebook profile. The daughter was a lockdown profile, the son wasn't. And on the son's page was a picture of them landing that morning at Birmingham International Airport here in the UK from a holiday across in Portugal. So I'd shipped across to my broadcaster then on Messenger, saying, okay, so your son's just back from Portugal. He landed at 6:01 this morning. Here's a picture of him. Here's a little video of him landing because he'd taken that and posted it. I then spent 4 hours on Messenger talking him through how to lock down the account, how to protect himself, how to look after himself. But that gives you an idea of just the kind of data, you don't need to look at the content per se. It's the links between the data that becomes so important. And this is the stuff that people like the UK government say, we're only collecting the information about information. There's nothing to worry about here. Actually, there's a huge amount to worry about. Let me give you another daft example. This one has a slightly more sinister twist at the end. So, we have in the UK an extremely racist group called the EDL, the English Defence League. It's a very, very, very racist group. They tend to be very aggressive as well. So they send busloads of people with pickaxe handles and clubs and these kind of things, and they create basically riots. That are race riots in the various cities, particularly in the northwest of the UK, where there are higher either Indian or Muslim groups in place. So they tend to announce they're going to be holding a rally in the middle of one of these cities. Typically it's Bradford here in the UK. So you might get a message on Facebook and Twitter saying we're going to be doing this rally in Bradford on the 10th of August. Now, we know from a policing point of view who is starting this particular rally up, who's going to be dealing with it. And once you start looking at the social network for those people, you realize then that we've now got all the aggressive lot grouping together, and they're all going to get on one bus and go up to Bradford. So it's a reasonable run. It's about 4 hours in a bus along the motorway or the freeway, At the other end of it, we've now got the other groups now starting to amass, saying that if you come here, we are going to kick off as well. So from a policing point of view, we've now got a choice. If we can divert them off the freeway as they're coming up, we're using the data to follow them and to track them, so we know where they are, we know who they are. So we stop them on the motorway. We pull them across and say, do you realize you were speeding, sir? Followed by, do I detect a slight whiff of cannabis in this vehicle? Would you like to come with us while we just search everybody? 6 hours later, they're released from the police station. They're taken back to the coach. They get on the coach and go back up. But of course, the whole thing by this time has just fizzled out. It's gone. Now, you could argue this in two ways. One way is that it's a win for intelligence and policing because you have stopped people from going up and doing a demonstration. You could actually swing it completely the other way and say we have fundamentally stopped and prohibited people's right to protest or right to march through the streets or right to make their feelings known. So you can spin that whichever way you want, but it shows here that you can very easily cause disruption through simply tracking people's data. And it's once you start getting into being able to control democracy itself that I start having problems with it.
Well, and that you make a valid point. And in your book, you are very fair about that. You go one side and then the other, right? Yeah, you do. And that is a fundamental question, especially in that particular situation. And, it really, that's a gray area in my opinion. It's like you're.
It is for me too. I mean, I've worked with this stuff for ages, and you look at it and you say, in some ways it could be seen as a very good thing. You've saved a lot of, you just know that this is going to cause problems, but you would have saved a huge chunk of policing money. You would have stopped people getting hurt and potentially, killed or locked up. You saved all of that stuff. But at the same time, you have prohibited freedom of speech. And it's such a weird area once you start getting into the ethics of some of this stuff. Now, in the book, of course, I take it in a slightly different twist on the same kind of theme, where, again, we look at people's lifestyles and we say if you go outside of the norm, then there are societal expectations. So people will expect you to be in a particular way or to have particular tendencies based on your lifestyle. Now, if you're outside of that norm, then it's a very easy thing to poison the well. Very easy. And you can't recover from it easily.
Well, yeah. And again, I'm looking at all this. I just was watching something the other day on TV about, all the cameras that they just now put up over in I think it was China, if I'm not mistaken. There's, 10 cameras on every corner. And when I mean every corner, I mean every corner. They can track people, and they can identify them as they're moving along. And if they decide that those people are not, being upstanding citizens, then they don't get credit. It's just the weirdest thing. I mean, it's how do they know who that person is? All that stuff is going on in the background. They got to have some way of identifying all those people. So that they've got, in a sense, in a very real sense, they've got dossiers on every person.
Yeah, but the thing is, let's put a slightly different part on this. And again, this is one of my friends who came up with this point. I love it as a point, so it's complete plagiarism. He said to me, yeah, if you look at George Orwell in 1984, he was, as an entity, was there watching everybody all the time. There was this omnipresent evil thing that was just watching you all the time. And you knew if you stepped out of line that Big Brother would get you. Actually, we've turned that on its head completely these days. We are providing all of this information about ourselves. So if you'd said to us 10 years ago, we are going to provide our governments with what coffee we drink, what friends we have, where we go on holiday, how often we go on holiday, who our doctors are, who our banks are, who we choose to do business with. And we're going to provide all of that all of the time. Every aspect of our life is going to be given to the government. You would turn around at that point and say to me, that is Big Brother on steroids. We can't allow that to happen. And yet we are quite happily handing all of this information over. If you think the stuff you give to social media is bad, bear in mind that your government, like mine, is sitting there and is watching everything in the background across all of the networks. They're not just tied into Facebook or Twitter. They're tied into every single piece of internet connectivity. They're monitoring the net, not just individual companies that are running on them. So your email, your banking details, your Twitter account, your Facebook account, your medical data, if you can communicate with your doctor through that. This conversation is coming over the internet right now, so we're talking on Skype. So this is being passed through as packets of data. Therefore, in the UK, it's going through a group called CESG, which is the GCHQ side of life, the monitoring stations. So the live data is all being monitored, and the metadata about the fact that we have spoken today will be on the record for the next 3 years at a minimum. So there's some really, really strange things here when you start pulling the government strings at this point. Now, if you get the companies involved with that, so you now have companies and governments working together, what you start to find then is that you need vast computing resources not to gather this information, but to be able to search for it in a meaningful way and to get meaning from the data. Back to my example earlier about sticking my hand out of the window. If I only give you part of the data, you only get part of the picture. If I give you the whole thing with a guy with the hosepipe at the top, therefore I've got a wet hand, it's not rain, it's guy with hosepipe. Actually, that might not be the whole picture either, because the hosepipe might be empty, because the water tank on the top's just exploded. So, yeah, you could have this whole sequence of events that unless you get the whole thing, then you are going to be biased in your opinion. And I spend most of my working day trying to get rid of bias out of data and getting rid of assumptions. Does the fact that you buy beans and toilet paper mean that we should be putting toilet paper next to the baked beans in a supermarket? Probably not. But from a data management point of view, people do come to some strange conclusions, and it's sometimes very, very hard to dissuade people that actually your data is fundamentally wrong here, and it is giving you the wrong picture. So if you feed the police the wrong piece of data, if you feed the intelligence communities the wrong piece of data about somebody, they then tend to believe it, and they will look for other pieces of data to back up that assumption. They switch then from being objective and looking at it in a reasonable way into suddenly saying, what else have we got? It's human nature. What else have we got that will take us down that path to prove it even more? And it's sometimes very hard to get them off that path once they're on it.
Okay, that's scary. I mean, you think about it, that's a little frightening for the average person. I mean, this is your world, right? You deal with this stuff. But for the average person, such as myself, and most of the, honestly, most of the listeners and the people that'll be listening to this, at a later date, they're not here on the live show. Though it's very challenging to think about everything that you do. And I understand the concept that, because of the fact that we got on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever it is, and we've got a website, and we're here on Skype, and there's other platforms like that essentially we've given away our rights. But the thing is we didn't know we were giving away our rights. We didn't know that they were doing all of this. Otherwise, most people wouldn't have been sharing as much as they had. But unfortunately, as they say, the cat's out of the bag, and here we are. We're all a part of this, big scenario of all these big governments and agencies. For the most part, the average person doesn't have to worry about things like that. We don't have anything that would be so tremendously interesting to them that they'd want to come back and do any more research on it. But like you said, if somebody's inputting data that's not correct, now all of a sudden we could have a problem.
Well, you know that you get problems when you get the calls saying, "Hello, Mrs. Smith, we'd like to sell you." And whoa, I'm not Mrs. Smith. I've got far too deep a voice for that. And, yeah, you get these things all the time. So, people do either give fake data but the call center operator at that point has no idea and believes that for that particular time, I'm Mrs. Smith. So yeah, there's a whole thing here about the reliability and the sort of trust that people put in data. We're sort of harping on a huge amount about the data, but there's also this whole side which is the control of that information and who really owns all of this stuff. Because, as I say, if you get the big corporates involved, Apple will say, "Oh, well, you may well have an iTunes account. You may have all of the bits that hang off the various services for that." You've got Facebook with all of the bits there, so there's WhatsApp and all the other bits that they've land grabbed for the customer base there too. Then you've got the Googles of this world with all the Android devices. So you've got billions and billions and billions of connected devices here. Now, if we wanted to control them, I could ask a really daft question, which is, if I wanted to cripple all of these services, if I wanted to take these things offline, actually I could do it with some very, very simple hits. If I hit the remote wipe on Google, Microsoft, and Apple, I have just probably killed the majority of consumer devices and business devices in the world. I've hit 3 services, and it's either the update service or the remote wipe. That's it, we're done. Now, if you think about how scary that is, that's control of data. We could probably take the whole of the Western world offline simply by hitting those services.
That's that's just monumentally freaky. And I've heard about stuff like this. Honestly, Mike, I've heard about stuff like this, but in your book and the way that you have laid it out, I mean, it's a very intricate and intriguing story. And how deep you go, because you get into a lot of the technical stuff, but also the players and where all this information goes. I mean, we're not talking about just governments. We're talking about agencies, we call them the 3-letter agencies over here, or the letter agencies as it were. And you have them over there as well. And it's tremendously interesting and scary at the same time to figure out that my information isn't just staying here in the United States because I'm a United States citizen. It's in Singapore, it's in China, it could be in Russia, it could be in Hawaii, it could be over there in Wales or Scotland or down in Africa for all I know. It could be in all those places. And
yeah, and it is probably in all of them.
Yeah, I would imagine. And, and it's not so much that I have anything to hide, but it's like oh my God, where does this stuff start and stop? You know, that's the big question. And, you know, honestly, you do a really good job in the book, kind of addressing some of those things. But, you know, before we get off the air tonight, I'm hoping that you can give us, you know, us just kind of regular folks some ways of changing some things and to make this more understandable as to, I mean, you just made a big thing here. All we have to do is hit a button and here's all this and it's all gone. Like, oh my God, if somebody had their panties in a wad for the day, I'm having a bad hair day. I don't want anybody to have any fun. Let me do this, right? You know,
yeah.
I mean, crazy. That's too much power, dude.
but we've given them this power. And you've only got really 3 companies that would be able to completely destroy that. Yeah, they've got the Western world in their grip, completely and utterly. And if they were to close down their servers, if they were to close down the systems, do a remote wipe, that's it. We'd be off the air right now. You know, I'm coming through a Mac machine at this end. I'd be off air. I couldn't then reconnect because my other devices at this point would be gone. If you're at Microsoft at the other end, and you know, it's only 3 companies. You've killed a lot, and the destruction that would cause is phenomenal. There was a thing not so long back called WannaCry, and that really hit everything in the UK in a bad way, particularly in the health authority here, health service. Basically because they were running steam-powered computers from the 1920s or something. And because they were so old, they'd never been patched properly, they'd never had any of the new security stuff in place. But actually, even that doesn't help. And where I go with the book is that there are a set of chips inside each computer and each device that are designed to run code that no one else can see, that no one else can
All right.
tamper with.
Yep, I want you to hang on to that. That's a big piece, and I want to leave everyone hanging with that because we're almost time for a break, and that's going to open up a whole bunch of stuff when people actually hear about this. Because as you went through this story and you were telling it, and then you get to that part in the book and it talks about that, I was like, OMG. Like I said, there's so many things that you just don't realize. Because we're trusting. Human beings are trusting. And, you know, we don't want to think the worst of everybody else. We just don't. You know, we just don't. Unfortunately, it does happen. And we're not unaware of that. I'm not unaware that, you know, I could go outside and my neighbor decided he was going to, you know, throw a thing of paint on me. You know, I don't know. But I'm going to trust that I'm going to walk out my door and my neighbor isn't going to get mad at me or accost me or whatever the case may be. Right? And so it becomes an issue here with the trust and how do the internet's been a fabulous thing to connect people. And so this is just going to be, we're going to get drilled down into it a little bit more. We've only got about a minute and a half, I think, left of this hour. So I want to remind people that, your book is on Amazon.com. And both the Kindle version and the paperback volume is there. I think that our gal here in the Wolf Spirit Radio chat room, she might have that link and set it up. I do really ask people to go out and get this book. It'll just blow your mind with the depth of information and everything that's coming through. Because we're talking about it, but there's just so much more in the book. It's so much more depth to the book. But we're going to get into some question and answers too in the second hour. But we're going to come back after this and we're going to talk a little bit about that hardware that you were just getting ready to talk about. And then we're going to go into some questions and some further dialoguing, if that's okay with you, Mike.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good. So I think we're at the time where we're ready for the top of the hour break here. So for all of you, please do stay tuned. We will be back with Mike Hawkes, Shadow Code, after this break. So if you need to get up and get a glass of water, run to the restroom, you've got about 5 minutes and then we will be back here. So hang on everybody and we'll be back right after the break.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
All right, everyone. Welcome back. And you are listening to Journeys with Rebecca right here on Wolf Spirit Radio and also Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com Studio B. My guest tonight again is Mike Hawks. For those of you just joining us, we're talking about shadow code. Very interesting stuff. Very, very vibrant conversation so far. And I left everyone hanging at the top of the hour. Mike, or when we got to the end of the first hour, rather, when you're talking about every piece of equipment and hardware. So I'm going to have you back up and kind of recalibrate that for everyone and get them all back on the same page, and then we're going to pick up from there. How's that?
Okay. So from the data side itself, we've sort of moved on from the data. I think I've harped on enough about that. We look at the computer technology and the stuff that's around to allow us to handle all of this information. I said earlier that the collection of information isn't hard, it's the processing of it. How do we get to be able to process all of this vast amount of stuff? So you need computing power and you need lots and lots of it. I'll give you a couple of examples again, if you don't mind, just around.
Absolutely.
Just to bring some life into this. There's a case recently where there was a huge company, a big international, that was attacked through a thing called a distributed denial of service attack. A big term, just basically means thousands and thousands and thousands of computers are throwing junk at your computer. Of course, what happens is it overwhelms computers. It takes this big company offline, and while they're struggling to try and cope with all of these various bits that, the computers now are overloaded at the front end. That causes problems further back through the rest of the systems. You end up with this whole huge amount of stuff that had gone horribly wrong. And while they tried to recover from that, hackers behind the scenes had gone in and they were taking all of the funds out of the banks, but they were doing it in very, very small amounts. So they were doing it in $100 amounts. So the first thing that you would be aware is that the police would be knocking on your door saying, "Excuse me, you're part of this theft. You took $100 from this company yesterday." You go, "No, I didn't. I was at work." And they say, "Okay, well, let's go to your bank and let's call up the accounts." And sure enough, you've got $100 coming in. And then on the same day, you have $100 going out with the tag banking error. And that's all that you know. But that money has gone not back to the bank. It's gone across a national boundary. So it's gone over, say, to France or to Germany. If they then follow that $100 from the US across into Germany, that same thing happens again and again. So it's gone through multiple accounts. And eventually it ends up in a Bitcoin account somewhere, which is largely untraceable. And the money's just gone. But the reason for doing these very small amounts is it doesn't trigger any money laundering rules and regulations. It doesn't get stopped by the banks because it's low value. And when we actually start looking behind the scenes at how this thing was put together, just to give you an idea of the scale of some of these things, there was a Russian command and control server. So this is run by the Russian mafia, firing off all of this massive processing capability to be able to handle both the denial of service, but also all of this money laundering and filtering and passing it through the accounts. That was actually using Chinese handsets. So the Chinese mafia have been giving mobile phones out to people with very good processing capabilities on them. They're mini computers in their own rights. So they've got all of these little tiny connecting devices. They give them to loads of people for free on the basis that they can use the computing power when they're not doing anything else. So they've now got the network and the computing power across vast scale. So Russian command and control server, thousands, if not millions, of very small computers available to them in China, using a Ugandan database of compromised bank accounts. Now, how do you, as one of the three letter agencies protect your citizens against that kind of attack.
Wow.
So we end up in this kind of world. Now, if you consider that that's what the criminals are able to do, that is nothing when you start looking at what the defense agencies, the intelligence agencies can do in these environments. They can start pulling in huge levels of resource. So they can access every device. They can pull anything that they need from any device. What the book touches on is in most computers now you have what's called a protected execution environment. So this is a protected section of the computer hardware, and the mobile device manufacturers use this to store specific information about the device itself when it starts up and the way that it loads the operating system, so that can't be hacked in theory. The same thing happens then in your main computers. So when you first boot the computer up, there's this secure bit which loads your operating system for you or kicks it off, and then you load your programs on top of that. So you've got this whole sequence of events that goes in. Now, from a hacking point of view and from a technology point of view, if I want to put a bad application onto your computer, I've got to get you to do something. So you either click on a link or you've actually got to do something in order for that to work. If I want to attack the operating system, I have to have it slightly lower down in the system somewhere. So I've got to find some way of getting it embedded in the operating system. The typical way of doing that is through the sorts of things like my Freebie piece earlier on. So not only does Freebie sit there and look at all the connections that are coming in, it simultaneously fires off every hacking tool in existence against your laptop. So let's say I've now got a really nice new corporate laptop. It's a shiny laptop and I work in a bank. I go to my public Wi-Fi hotspot and I sign in, and it's my little Freebie box. That installs something like a backdoor on your laptop so that when you then take that back into your bank, you've now become the hacking entry point for the entire bank network. Now, the intelligence agencies are able to do this on steroids. They're able to do this across entire network pieces. So they can install stuff. And in the UK, again, the recent laws that came in actually said that is now an acceptable thing for the police or the intelligence agencies to do. So they can deliberately tamper with your network connection and install software on your computer without you knowing about it. And that's within the law. That's perfectly acceptable as far as they're concerned. And there are challenges on all of this stuff at the moment going through the European courts. So from the device point of view, you've got this sort of hierarchy of sort of hacking, if you will. At the top end, you've got your applications. In the middle, you've got the operating systems. But if you can really get into the chips themselves, then there is nothing that you can do at an operating system level or at an application level because it simply isn't visible to those pieces of software. So every computer and every mobile phone has these protected execution environments. We have no idea what code exists on those. If you want to install stuff on it, there's a particular way of going about it, but you can put software effectively that runs inside that environment that has access to everything that computer has to offer, but you cannot see it. So what are they putting in there? What are they running? And again, part of Shadow Code touches on what ends up in there and how they deal with it.
Yeah. It's an amazing thing. Like I said, when I couldn't quit turning the pages. I'm not kidding. I'm like, okay, what's going to happen next? Oh my God, what's he going to find out next? Oh my God, where's that going? Seriously, it's mind blowing. It really is. Let's stop here for a minute and let's go ahead and we've got some questions that come in, and then I know there's some other things that you would like to have, to talk about, and we will get to those. Let's go ahead and take some of these questions because there may be some afterwards.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see. I got the wrong glasses on. This one, does the guest have experience on shungite shielding or on cellular devices to block data mining remotely?
There are, data mining through remote processes. It depends on which network you're on. If you're going to go through the cellular networks, actually, I have far more confidence in the cellular networks than I do any of the Wi-Fi networks. So I wouldn't, for example, use mobile banking on a Wi-Fi network in a public space. I just wouldn't do it. On cellular networks, it depends on where you are in the world. Unfortunately, we had. I'll go slightly techie for a mo. Bear with me. It does sort of make sense. On the mobile networks globally, there's a group called the GSMA. So it's the GSM Association, and they really define the standards of everything that has to go on the mobile networks. And if you don't comply with their rules and regulations, they have the teeth to be able to block you from the global networks. They've never done it, but they've threatened a few times. Now they mandate that you must have a level of security on your mobile connections, and for your 3G and 4G connections, you should have a minimum of a thing called AC51. AC51 is an encryption algorithm, and I say, bear with me, I'm not going to take you into horrible areas. But that was compromised probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, so it was globally recognized to be compromised. And so the mobile networks globally were mandated through the GSMA that they must all upgrade their service to something called AC53. Guess how many globally did it?
I don't know.
None. Not a single one. So you have a compromised but still takes a few minutes to crack cellular network. Apart from in Asia, where they just simply said, well, let's go to AC50, which is effectively turn off the network. So they've turned off encryption on the network completely in Asia. So if you're in Asia and you're listening right now, your cellular networks aren't encrypted at all because it's just too much faff. In the US and across Europe, you have a level of protection that is greater than you get off Wi-Fi. It's much more difficult to target cellular, not impossible, but a lot more difficult. And Wi-Fi is easy to do. Now, if we're going to block things at a cellular level, there are parts of the cellular network where the networks are already put blocks in. And that's done on the backbone between the networks. So anything which is carried across the networks, we can install and do install antivirus and connection protection stuff. There's a whole load. There's so many protections in that network. It's unbelievable. So your cellular stuff, if there is something which is seen as a global problem, if they can work out the protocols for it, they can turn it off, and they do. But that does require operator agreement. So the various trade associations around the world, as I sit on one of them, they do look at these things and start saying, well, actually, if we turn this off, then that will disable that particular piece of malware or that bad practice. Mining in particular has become something of an issue. So basically what you're trying to do is create an incredibly complex, a very, very complex piece of maths in order to create a virtual coin. So the proof, to prove that it's a real coin is very easy, but the generation is very hard and takes a lot of computing power. So you're finding a lot of people are burying this mining code, the stuff that does all the hard work, and buries it into applications and get it scattered across the globe. So you've got, again, a bit like the Chinese mafia with their thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of devices, getting the same kind of thing with people downloading apps in the background, using that computing power to generate this stuff. As they're being found, so they're being stripped out of the networks, but actually finding the code that does it is hard if you don't know what you're looking for. And if you can't control what people are buying or where they're downloading it from, then actually there's an issue for that. So it's not as simple as just turning it off on the cellular stuff, because if you download your apps when you're on your Wi-Fi network, then actually the cellular protection that you've got just doesn't exist. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, that one. It's not a straightforward answer.
Yeah, I can see where that would be a problem. And that's one of the things that I personally myself don't do is get on my computer when I'm out in public, you know, like a McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever it is. I never ever use Wi-Fi on any place. Matter of fact, I've got my system here is a plug-in system. I don't even have Wi-Fi in my house. So, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean, we know that doesn't mean anything because, you know, obviously I have a cell phone and some other stuff. So, yeah. But, yeah, it's a problem. Well, and then you got to find people that know how to find the code. So you got to hire the people. So you've got to know how to have them know where to look and give them the resources to be able to find the codes and then to strip them. And it sounds like it's a very cumbersome job, but, and it's too bad there's just so many really rotten apples out there. You know, really, it's been.
Yeah, but The daft thing is that there's as quickly as you're developing the systems to protect against these things, you've got new people working on new ways of doing it. Who would have thought that just driving a truck down a highway would be a lethal weapon? But they've done that, such a simple thing.
Oh, for sure. We could get into all kinds of different applications with that. All right, so let's go to the next question. This one, and I think I missed one in there somewhere. So if you have another question for the guest, please do remember, if I'm not asking the question, to put it in all caps so that I can find it easily, and then ask the guest the question. Do you have any knowledge on 5G technology, if it's harmful on the bodies of men or children? Do you have any information on that?
Okay, so there's been a lot of research in this. I work with some of the universities over here on 5G technology. We're actually reusing some of the radio frequencies that have been used by other technologies. So we're sort of moving we're moving things around to make the bandwidth available for 5G. So we're not actually exposing ourselves to anything new in 5G, other than we've got something which is probably a little bit closer to you as a transmitter or a receiver. With 5G, you've got potentially much greater range. And as part of that range, you've got the ability there to have more powerful transmitters and receivers, but it only needs that when it's switching up. So if you're starting to get out of range of it, it might ramp up the power while you're hopping between the various stations here. So, pardon me, we could argue either way again with this one. There's evidence on both sides. Some are saying it generates local thermal increases in flesh, and therefore it must be doing something. Other sides are saying that that's natural, just because it's natural heat off radiation, and the levels are so low that it doesn't do any harm. So at the moment, there's no conclusive proof in either direction, and we keep going through this loop with 3G technologies, 4G technologies. We're doing it again with the 5G technologies, but we're still within the same radio frequency ranges as we've already been using in the past for things like TV and other environments as well. So we're not actually exposing humans en masse to things that they've not already been exposed to.
Okay, fair enough. That's fair enough. All right, so I'm gonna switch up gears here. Let's have you go into the whole Five Eyes thing.
Okay, so the intelligence communities, you have laws, we have laws. They prevent us from spying on our own. Ours less so than yours at the moment. And California, I gather, are putting some good practices in place at the moment to prevent spying and the like. So they're trying to get you up to GDPR standards over here in Europe, which is the General Data Protection Regulation. So if I can't spy on my own, but I've got some really friendly groups of people, there's a thing called the Five Eyes. Five Eyes are basically the UK, USA, Canada, New Zealand, Australia. So if I don't want to spy on my own, then there is absolutely nothing stopping me from sending a request across to one of my Five Eyes colleagues and saying, how would you fancy having a look at this for me? So a lot of the rules and regulations here are saying that we can't do this to our own people. You'll have the same phraseology in your legislation that says that you can't spy on your own. However, it's perfectly acceptable and is seen as a normal practice to be spying on everybody else because you need intelligence. So there are these very quiet agreements that are going on behind the scenes where it's simply a question of would it be useful perhaps for you to have a look at this? And they'll have a look at it and say, no, but we found out all this information. Now, they can't use this again comes back into what's called attributable data. You can't use that in a court of law per se. But there is nothing stopping you from having an anonymous tip-off from an off-duty officer somewhere that was saying, I just noticed this really strange handover of money on the freeway, and that results in a drug bust with a few $1 million worth of cocaine being recovered or whatever. Same kind of thing with anti-terrorism legislation and other bits. So the Five Eyes principle. There are actually varying degrees of these. So you've got 5 Eyes, 7 Eyes, 13 Eyes, and they just increase the number of countries that are part of that. So a lot of the US stuff is processed in Israel, for example. So if you look at these various intelligence communities, they work very closely together. And again, a lot of this is around the connections between the data sets and making sure that the data is shall we say, in an easily digestible form for those that have actually got to work with it on a day-to-day basis. So again, part of this is the presentation of data to make sure that your allies are getting the data in the way that you want them to consume it. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You can ask for them to look at something, but if they come back and say that these guys are actually terrorists, you arrest them and prosecute them based on that kind of information, but they're not really. But say for argument's sake, the UK might want somebody locked up. It's a good way of getting around all the legislation and the requirements for proof and so on and so on. So yeah, the Five Eyes, again, they become part of the book. But it is a bit of a weird thing, but there are also sort of almost competitions running between the agencies in terms of can they do stuff, faster, better, than other agencies. And so you get into this whole technology race between the agencies and, you get into interesting conversations, shall we say, between the agencies as well. One of the original reasons for me writing, the book was actually that I got approached by an intelligence agency through the UK police. I was doing a lot of forensic training on what you can do with data, and I was demonstrating my little freebie box again, and horrifying an awful lot of people and scaring a lot of people. And as part of it, at the end of that, there's one of the guys going across to a South American country and was saying, we're going to be doing a load of training out there. They came back from that training with the question, can we or would you be interested in selling your freebie box to this particular country? They've got a big drugs problem and they would like to put these boxes all over the place. And it gave me a real moral dilemma. Do I really want to start promoting spying and complete removal of everybody's rights? Because this thing isn't particularly selective. It's just grabbing everything about everybody that connects to it. So it gave me a real dilemma. And at that point, I was contemplating writing the book, and I'd actually thought, well, okay, let's go for it. Because if I'd built the box and sold the box, I could never write the book, and I could never tell anyone what goes on. But I decided I'd rather do that than perhaps start making loads of boxes for just for snooping on people without any rhyme or reason. It didn't sit well with me.
Well, and thank you for your moral code with that, seriously. And, I can see, again, you can always see where the benefit would be in certain cases. Unfortunately, people don't use the information that they get in a moral way.
No, and we have some amazingly stupid examples where we had a council, for example, who had access to this sort of personal information, where they were using the law to allow them to go and put private detectives on two parents who said that their child was living within the catchment area of this really good school, and they didn't believe that the parents were living there. So the council actually employed effectively private detectives and data analysts to work out that these parents didn't actually live at the address. They'd merely rented it. They lived somewhere else, but they'd employed thousands and thousands of pounds worth of resource for this, simply to say whether that child could go to that school. Now, to me, that's complete abuse of every right that you have. It's just insane. But that's what, people, once they start believing something, that's not right. They start digging their heels in. They start going for it. And again, human nature says they're then looking for the proof, regardless of whether it's there or not. Right,
exactly. And they're going to find something. They're going to find something, yeah. And some of that stuff is just not accurate that they find, but it appears, just like you said, is it raining? Is it the hose, or did the water tower break?
Yeah, if you're going to look for flaws, you can find the most perfect diamond in the world, but the flaw with that is it's perfect. You'll always find a flaw if you're looking for one.
True, that's very true. Well, let's get into. There's a couple things that, because of this. And everything is synchronistic. There's just stuff that shows up in your space. I was approached by somebody that and asked me if I would do this interview with you. And it took us a little bit to get together, and I was like, oh yeah. And so anyway, so after we set that up and I got your book, now all of a sudden I'm being inundated. Now see, this is where this gets a little creepy too. I'm getting inundated with information about stuff that's computer related, oriented, technology. And the two words that have come through over since the last week I talked to you was chain block and hash graph.
Okay.
Are you familiar with either of those?
I am. Well, blockchain is
blockchain. Okay.
Yeah, is all the cryptocurrency stuff. So we touched on that a little bit earlier on. So this is virtual money. I would imagine that actually buying the book, because I've got tags on things like conspiracy thriller, computers, technology. I think the internet's in there. There's a whole lot of tags in there that I had to put in from the sales point of view. When you register the book, you've got to have what categories does it cover. So I would imagine that a lot of that has come from the fact that you've A, searched for something which has got these tags in it, and then B, actually purchased something, which means that you are very, very interested in this subject. And I commend you for that.
Well, there you go. Thank you for that. Well,
yes, it's all my fault. You can blame me.
It's all right. I got an education. Now listen, this is a benefit to me as well, right? And and then this information that I've got, again, your book, there's a lot of people that I'm actually turning on to this. And one of them is, I was telling you about, was my son, he's a computer engineer. And I talked to him today a little bit about blockchains and Hashgraph and to see if he'd heard of anything like that. Actually I was just kind of putting out my feelers to see if he was still keeping up with, with the latest and greatest information, because he's one of those that he's a network guy. So he gets into the networks and he's a problem solver. He's the one that goes in there and figures out what works, what doesn't work, and things like that. And so he's not familiar with it. So I thought, well, his mom's got one up on him, so I guess I'm not too old to learn. Anyway, so I thought this book would be a good thing for him to have. So I'm going to have to order a couple of paperback copies of it so that I can give it to people that I think would really benefit from having their eyes open as to what it is that they're actually working with, in the case of my son and other people that just would be interested in it. So this Hashgraph, are you familiar with this at all?
Yeah. So again, when you're working with computers, quite often you don't want to not necessarily expose the raw data to things. So there are two things you can do. You have one which is encryption, so you can encrypt it, and then at some point in the future you can decrypt it and you can reread it. For things like passwords and the like, you don't really want to be able to reverse that process. So you do what's called hashing instead. So you hash it instead of encrypting it. Now, hashing, that means then that you can only really test to see whether or not the value that you're giving, if hashed the same way, gives you that result. So it's great for passwords. So let's say, for argument's sake, I hash a password that we've shared, and it comes to the value 10. They're normally a lot longer, a lot more complex than that, but we'll call it 10. So I've created this password. It's hashed, comes to 10. If you typed in that same password and we use the same methodology for it, it would also come back to the value 10. Therefore, you'd enter the same password as me. We could access the same content. Graphs are ways of looking and joining these various things together. So what I can have is a token in effect, so this hashed thing that I can pass around, and it becomes searchable, it becomes manageable in its own right. So in the good old world of databases, when computing was fun, we used to have these rows and tables of things, and you'll have seen them all over the place. So you end up with this great long list of stuff. But in a social world, you're not quite sure what you want to connect to what. So you end up, instead of having these linear tables all over the place, you have what's called a graph, which links them together. So you can have one part linking. So I'm linked to you now on a social network. I'm also linked to other people. I'm linked to particular events, or I'm linked. So some of it can be events, some of it can be images, some of it can be conversations. It can even be, sort of this conversation we're having right now. So all of that stuff ends up in a graph database. Some of that is then hashed so that you can't access the content anymore, but we can still access it in a readily consumable way, and we can test to see whether or not we are communicating. So it won't be you and I as names on the Skype channel. We will have a hash value each, and it will be this hash has spoken to this hash, and there's a graph behind it which is linking us together. So yeah, it's complex stuff, but it's actually I use use graph databases day in, day out. I work with some of the best data analysts in the world. I'll give them a quick plug as well while I'm here. They're really good. But part of what we do is to link this data together. So a graph is a way of being able to do that without having to have a formal structure. And it means then that we're able to visualize stuff and pull it all together far faster than if we were to try and apply structures to everything.
Okay. That's given me a little bit more information. I just barely, scratched the surface of that. So that's given me a little more information. So let's do this. And I was listening to you very carefully in the very beginning when you were talking about, I have a tendency to use the same or similar passwords for just about everything that I get into, with the exception of my computer itself. That one is a whole different one, and I don't use that password for anything else. And I change it every couple of months. But listening to you, you're saying that all the sites that require that you log into that require a password, that they all need to be different. Now that could be a little more challenging, because I bet you I've got 30 different things that I do on my computer, from banking to shopping to forums and just all kinds of different things. My software that I use for my scheduler for my website, all that stuff. There, at least 30. And for me to use 30 different passwords is extraordinarily cumbersome, but if that's what I have to do. However, that being said, if I'm already compromised, would it make a difference if I went in and changed all my passwords now because it's already been compromised?
Right. Two very different aspects of this. So first things first. Let's say, for argument's sake, you are a big fan of the Pullover Knitting Group, and they've got their own website, and you're an expert at knitting, and they've been running since 1973, and as a group, they're really friendly, but they really don't know the first thing about computers. So it's a small group, their own website, and you join their forum and you talk regularly on the forum and you give lots of people some really good advice about how to knit jumpers. So that seems quite okay, but actually there's no encryption on that because it was done before all the secure website stuff came in, and even if they don't know how to implement that stuff anyway. So you've got something here which is a very, very low grade, from a security point of view, environment. So you go into there, you put your email in as your username, and you put your password in. That's sent across in clear text over the network to their server. That means that anything which is listening on this network or is in your computer and is looking for passwords has now got that data. So if you use the same password on multiple systems, so let's say now that you've got that password on your email account, I already know your email address because I've just had that as your login, and I've now got your password. So I can now log into your email. That means that I can send a reset request to every other service because it's going to come back to your email, and I can delete the responses that come back before you even see them. So I've now gone and reset. I now own all your accounts.
Okay.
So the point here is that, I might have gone for a slightly extreme, but my point is that you might have the best email service with the best security in the world, but you've compromised it because you've used the same credentials as you have for the weakest security system in the world. Now, if you use the same email, if you use the same password for everything, so let's say that I've now got the same password for my bank account, and I use those as my mysterious 7, 3rd, and 26 digits of my passcode, I've also got access to your money. So if I'm clever about it, I don't do anything with all of this data. I just sit there and wait on it, and at some point I'll use it, just like that big scam I was talking about earlier on with the Nigerian databases. They had hundreds of thousands of global accounts that had never been touched. So these were the virgin accounts, if I can call them that, that had never been compromised in any way, shape or form. They're a higher premium as far as the Nigerians are concerned, so you can buy them at a higher price. It'll cost you $500 rather than $5 for a completely new account. And from a management, it becomes very easy then for automated system, what password you've got, there's a thing called deep packet inspection, which is fascinating stuff. It says in encrypted traffic. So this is stuff which has been encrypted. Is it likely, more likely or less likely, that this particular phrase exists in that packet of data? So I'm able, without decoding it, to look at that data and say, is it this password, this one, or this one? That's given me the highest level of probability, therefore I'll go with that. So simple things like password 123 or let me in, these sorts of phrases, because they're so common, they do publish every now and again a list of the most common passwords. They're fired off as what's called dictionary attacks. They just keep going one after the next. But for you, if you've got the same password across multiple systems, it might be that you consider some of those less important systems. You don't worry about those, therefore you use the same password, and that really doesn't matter. Actually, it does. Those less important systems are the ones that are going to leak and do the most damage for you. Assuming, of course, that the bigger guys have got proper security and put all the best practices and latest practices in place all the time, which of course sometimes they don't. So again, you can theoretically, Amazon have had hits. I think that virtually every of the major service providers in one way or another at some point have suffered some data loss. So if you've got the same password in all your systems, actually you get one, you've got them all. And that's a real risk. I know from the connections that you're sending out from your computer which services you're accessing. If I've got your passwords across all of those services, I can create an awful lot of false credit requests. I don't have to compromise your accounts directly. I can create new credit card applications for a new address, because when the email comes in, I'm going to respond to it before you get it, confirming all of those details. So now you've got 50 credit cards that you never knew you had, and they're all hounding you for it. You never applied for them, but it was one single account in the group, the netting group that caused all of those problems. So yeah, pain in the backside, but I would say separate passwords for each if you can. There are ways and means of coming up with ways that you can remember these things, but it might be equally easy to go for password managers and these sort of things to deal with it. So separate password in each case. Changing your passwords actually is a good thing. As long as you're going for new ones. I would suggest a phrase rather than a word as well. So if you're saying hello space world, that's much more complex than hello world. If you're going to say something like, I run a really good internet radio station, that's something you can remember readily. It's a long password, or passphrase, but actually it's very, very, very difficult then for somebody to deal with, because it's got things like space characters in there or full stops or other bits and pieces. Recent research is showing that doesn't make, the strange characters don't make a huge difference, but the length really does. So the longer the passphrase, the better.
Oh, okay. Well, that'll help. So I know what I'm doing tomorrow. Okay, we have a question. What about those programs that save passwords for you?
Again, depends on the quality of them. Go for the trusted ones, and they work well. They encrypt everything, so they're not stored in the clear. I won't endorse particular ones of them, but there are some really big names out there that do a very good job. Go for it if you have difficulties. I have a particular system that I use for my passwords. I won't tell you what it is because it gives it away. Sorry. But I have a system that works very well for mine, so I can remember through that particular system. But if you're not a systems type person and would normally write them down or do something like that, then a password manager is a good thing.
So even though, let's say my system is compromised, right? Somebody's already got my stuff. If I go in and change my passwords, like you have suggested on all the sites that I'm at, it will still help. It will help at this point.
Yeah, well, yes, as long as they haven't. The thing here is that they're not actually on that site at that time. When they come back to log back in, they won't be able to anymore.
I see. Okay, so that does help. Okay. So I can see where that would help. Okay, that makes total sense. So let's get back to the book for a little bit. We've got, I don't know, about 15 minutes, I think, close to that, 12, 15 minutes, something like that. Okay, there's another question. What about places that you go to that put in a password for you? and then they tell you to change it and you don't. Is that a problem? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So there's one that's been automatically generated. They email it to you, you then put that in, and the first thing you have to do then is change it. That sort of thing. There are lots of variations on the theme for that. It's been system generated and has been sent out either through, they quite often send it out as an SMS, so to your cell, or as an email. If it's come through email, it's slightly more risky again than SMS, but SMS has gone through multiple systems. I would change it, but that's me, and I tend to be far too anal about these things.
That's okay. That's just fine. And it's all good. We have another question that came in from a gentleman that's on Skype, listening on Skype, and he asked if you could recommend any third-party browsers for the two operating systems, Mac and Windows. Are there any third-party browsers that would be good for the operating systems, Mac and Windows?
I still go with Safari on the Mac. I generally favor Google's Chrome and Firefox across both platforms. Safari on the Mac is quite good, and I've seen very little leakage from it. Chrome I tend to use on the Windows systems.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. Seriously, I wouldn't have thought that because of being Google, right? I use Google Chrome myself, but I do have Mozilla Firefox installed. I just don't use it. It doesn't always.
Chrome these days is a lot better. A few years ago, I wouldn't. I would have stuck with Firefox. Firefox, I think, is just slightly behind the curve at the moment.
Yeah, and that's what I ran into problems with. Is some of my stuff wouldn't work well because the Firefox wasn't up to date. It didn't.
They sort of leapfrog each other. So this is a weird one to answer right now. As of today, I'd stick with Safari on the Mac and I would go with Chrome on Windows. If you ask me in a month's time, Firefox might have done a new generation where they've got something which gives you better protection. But Chrome's going the right way at the moment. I quite like Chrome.
Okay, cool. That's excellent. That's excellent news for a lot of us because that's what I'm using is Chrome. So that's good. So back to the book for just a little bit. There's a lot of, and I'm going to use this term, and maybe inappropriate or inaccurate, but there's a lot of espionage in your book. That's why it reads like a mystery to me. Would you say that would be a true statement?
Yeah, there is, and it's very deliberate. And I'll go back to what I've always said about this: that the tech is real, the processes are very real as well. The way that the agencies work is very real. I have friends who are people like forensic analysts and police officers that I have run the book past them. It was interesting with one of the police guys. I'd sent something across with a query around how do you handle a murder case, because there's both an explosion, so is it a terrorist piece, and there is also a murder in there.
Yeah.
And those two. Those two bits, I wanted to make sure that not only was the tech right, but the process was right for the police and for the intelligence agencies. So I actually asked the question, what would they do this? And by return, I got the police handbook on serious and organised crime, and the police handbook on murder investigations. So it is absolutely correct in those senses. I had a friend as well who works in the intelligence agencies. Very, 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 very kindly ran me through how the intelligence agencies communicate, not in the lower levels of detail, but I've spent a fair amount of my time as well working with setting up networks for intelligence gathering and these kind of things. So the processes that are there and the way that the intelligence services operate is absolutely by the book. Even down to, I mentioned second sourcing earlier, where something will happen and you can't include that in normal evidence. But if it comes from one of the Five Eyes, then you will find there's an off-duty officer that just happened to be in the local convenience store who happened to be buying something at the time. Or there was somebody passing that happened to tip off a police officer at the time. There's always a second source for these sorts of information. And that's more often than not the intelligence agencies at work, because they can't reveal the fact they've been watching a guy for the last month or whatever, because it would completely blow their cover. So I've tried to make The tech, we've sort of majored a lot on the data and the tech, and actually, while the tech is in there and the first part of the book sort of sets up the tech scene, the rest of it is all about the intelligence agencies and the way that they manipulate people and the way that they control everything from investigations into people to the outcomes at the other end of it. And I've been very careful to make sure that all those are correct. I didn't want people picking it up and going, that would never happen, and that would never happen. Actually, the ending is the second ending. The first time I wrote it, the heroes all, and I got picked up by one of the intelligence guys who said, that would never happen. And I just thought, yeah, you're right. So I slapped my own wrist and rewrote the ending.
Okay, we got one last question. I think that just came in. We got about 8 minutes left in the show. And I got a couple more things I want you to go through. But he asked about Chromium browser, which is the open source version of Chrome. You talk a little bit about open source stuff in your book, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So open source is, I have a big amount of respect for open source. It tends to have a huge number of eyes looking at it. So if you go for the stuff that is well represented, so you can find it on things like GitHub and other repositories like that. So you can go for a lot of the open source stuff. Most of the hardware and software that we're using right now to talk through Skype is running across the Linux platform. Some of it's on Microsoft, but there's a huge chunk of the internet is all running on open source stuff. So it tends to have a lot of eyes looking at it. If you have got holes in there, speaking from experience as somebody that's invented security stuff, if I put stuff out on the net into the open source community and I say this is a secure piece of software, I can guarantee within half an hour of that going out there, I've got people pouring all over it and coming back and saying, you know what, you haven't protected your memory from this sort, you haven't done that, you haven't done this. And in some cases, you get people that just turn around and write you a chunk of code and say, this will solve that problem for you. So you get a lot of experts who look at this stuff. And as long as you're on top of your game with this, so the likes of Chromium have very active assessors. You don't get into the core code base at all unless it's gone through loads and loads of the proverbial eyes looking at them. And I've got a lot of respect for open source. We tend to find that the open source stuff is more stable, is better put together, particularly those that have got big community contributors in there, because they're very well managed and very well maintained. And you can normally look at that, and that becomes part of the assessment as to whether I'll use open source stuff, is how well that community around it and how active that community is. Particularly for me, I look at the security stuff and see what they're doing in there. And if you're getting good quality responses coming back, then yeah, okay, I'll give it a go.
Well, back to my son, the IT guy. He has several different operating systems on his computer, and depending on what he's doing, he will choose one or the other, depending on what it is. Yeah. Okay. So I think I need to have a conversation with him and have him sit down and show me how to do all this stuff again, because it's been a while. I got pretty lax, to tell you the truth. So, and I think many of us do. I spend a great deal of my time on here, and obviously I don't have the background or the training or the knowledge that you do and he does and a lot of other people do, but I certainly do think that I need to do some things different in this. And I do recommend your book so much, because the stuff in there, honestly, it is just crazy. Crazy as to how far you go into depth in your book about where this road led you from that point of when you were in that demonstration. And I always believe everything happens for a reason, and you happened to look down at that right time on your computer when that code came through, that data came through, and you went, oh, that's wrong. And then that began this whole journey, and you were the one to do it. You were the one to expose it. You were the one to bring it forward into the light, so to speak. And this book does do that.
Well, as I say, I've tried to make it so that it's as readable as possible. I don't want people to get buried in tech and other bits. There's no pleasure in that for anyone. So I'm hoping that the balance between tech and storyline is good enough to carry it through.
Well, I want to read this from the very first part of your book because I read it and it was funny. And this is where you're having a conversation with the editor-in-chief you called Mother. And you said, "Is it okay?" And he replies, "Yes, it's fine, although I skipped through most of the technical bits." And you respond, "Oh, too much? Should I remove them?" And he says, "No, it's important and probably means something to someone."
That's true.
I had to laugh, and I was like, he's at least honest. He's not technologically savvy with that. I just thought that was the cutest thing. So there's a lot of information in there that is very, very technical. And for people that are techie, I would tell them that this is just this is a fascinating read. And for those of you who just want to learn more and you really want a good read and you want to find out a kind of a whodunit, because that's what this really does go like, by the way, Mike. I mean, it's like a whodunit. And I hope things have settled for you. I hope things are going better for you now after all of this thing that you just went through here. How long ago did all this take place, by the way, real quick before we let you go here?
We're looking at about 12 months ago now, 18 months, something like that. So it's quite recent.
Very recent. That's what I thought. Because you give a timeline in there as well. You give when the date when all this started and kind of closing date as to when you finished this up as far as the process before the book was written. I find that rather interesting. And you must have some hell of a negotiating skills, I have to tell you. Anyway. Yeah, because you're here talking to me, if you understand my meaning.
I do. Thank you. Yeah.
And I'm so glad. I'm grateful. Listen, you have just been so fun and patient, and thank you for answering all the questions tonight. Again, it's Shadow Code. You can find his book, either Kindle or paperback, on Amazon.com. I know that the links have been put out into the chat rooms. By the way, there's several people that have contacted me that will be in contact with you, Mike, via your email to get you on some other programs. I just see really good things coming for you. I appreciate you so much, and I hope that we can continue to have some conversations off and on throughout the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for bringing me on the program. I really do appreciate it.
Well, it's great, and I hope that you were able to get out the information that you wanted to everyone, and if people don't understand how very important this is, they need to know what their world is. And again, I sit here at my computer a lot of times of my days, and it's important that I know what's going on and what's actually being done. You know, putting your rose-colored glasses on doesn't change the facts. So, you know, I've got a lot of work to do. You've given me some more work to do, and I appreciate it because it's good work.
Well, you know where I am if you need help.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's very nice of you. And I just may call upon you and ask you some silly questions that a commoner would, and you'd be going, "Oh God, that girl doesn't know much of anything."
There's no such thing as a stupid question. There really isn't.
That's true. Well, again, I thank you very much. For the rest of you, again, Mike Hawks, a big thank you to him for coming and exposing this information. And again, there's so much more into the book that he didn't get into. There's a lot of reasons. Once you read the book, you'll understand why we didn't cover all of it here tonight or some of it here tonight because of the content of it. But it is something that you all really do need to educate yourself on and make yourself aware of. Again, it's Amazon.com, Shadow Code. And for the rest of you, if you will, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will be up there sometime tomorrow at the latest. So if you want to go back and listen to it, please do, or share it with somebody. Definitely have them go to my YouTube channel. In the meantime, I thank you all so much for being here. Until we meet again, wherever your life's journey leads you. Many blessings, everyone, and good night. Good night, Mike. Good night, JP.
Good night.
Good night.